From the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, this is For the Life of the World, a podcast about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity.
The disciplines of solitude and silence have always been challenging for people through the ages for various reasons, but wondering if in these days, in our times, as we are being formed by these technologies, certain aspects of God's nature become actually more difficult also for us to access or to experience because it might feel incredibly uncomfortable for us. We are unaccustomed to God's silence or God's stillness because we are a people on the move, always getting content, always getting some kind of feedback from someone immediately, right? And so what happens then with our interior spirituality, like the shape of our souls? So much of the AI argument assumes that people just want to be seen, which again sounds really compelling. You're like, yeah, people just want to be seen. Listen to her. And she's like, no. What human beings actually want is they want to be seen by another human being. Why? Because that human being creates risk for them. That human being could judge them, could dismiss them, could say, forget you, you're hopeless. It's that risk. But when that human being listens and takes in and actually says, I cherish your dignity. I cherish your life experience. You are worthy of my time, even despite whatever has just been said. That's the piece of it that we want as human beings, not merely that someone's just going to receive. That's incredible insight into our humanness. But for those who are Christians, I think that's also insight into what grace is. It's like, oh, that's grace. that's what it is, right? And so, and that's what everybody is longing for in the end. And in that sense, AI technologies aren't capable of creating conditions in which grace can happen. It's endemic to personhood.
I'm Macie Bridge with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, and this is Solo, a series on solitude, loneliness, and being alone. If you're listening to this episode right now, you're probably using a smartphone or maybe a computer. I recorded this episode using a microphone and a computer loaded up with multiple types of software and web platforms. It's really something incredible. Though you and I have probably never been in the same room as one another, we're able to share this wonderful learning experience together. I think this is delightful and kind of creepy. And it's happening because of the technology other humans have created. We can likely all agree that technology has mystified, multiplied, and magnified nearly all of our relational impulses, for better and for worse. And from my perspective, it's the elephant in the room when it comes to talking about loneliness in today's world. Because yes, we can use it to share with each other in incredible ways, like you and I are right now. But we're also familiar with blaming technology for aspects of our loneliness dilemma, a pattern of accusation that I'm not sure is entirely wrong. Alarmingly, technological advancements are stepping in to fill the human void in many spaces of need, like nursing homes, or even just personal conversations with an artificial intelligence. On today's episode, I'm joined by sociologist Felicia Wu Song. Felicia enters this conversation as a sociologist of culture, of meaning-making, and as a Christian. She helps me dive into the phenomena of technology in the age of loneliness, reflect on the call of the church in the digital age, and grapple with how people of faith may approach AI, and ultimately suggests that loneliness may actually be really important to the human experience. Thanks for listening today. Felicia, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's really a pleasure to be with you, Macie.
So I'm thrilled to be inviting your perspective as a sociologist into the series that I'm working on around themes of solitude and loneliness. Your work as a sociologist, I think, inhabits this really fascinating intersection between Christian spirituality, and you're also really interested in technology. And I think you're doing really important work around AI and thinking about how all of these things impact each other. I would love if you could kick us off by just sharing with our audience a little bit. How do you find yourself here, and what brings you to this research personally?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I came to sociology with an interest in culture. And when I use the word culture, I don't mean it in the sense of different societies have different cultures, that kind of multicultural sense, but rather culture in terms of meaning. How do we come to understand certain meanings of aspects of our life? Like, what does identity look like for a particular society? What does community look like for a particular society? And so my interest in culture is about how do we come to understand these meanings? How do we live together? How do those meanings change through time? And that's where the technology question is super interesting to me, because we all still use the same words. We talk about identity, we talk about community, but we all know that those words mean something really different for us now in 2025 compared to what it meant 100 years ago when people were still using the same words, right? As a sociologist, what I like to bring together is trying to understand, how does the technology that we use mediate or shape how we experience personal identity, how we experience community, how we experience relationships? And also, how does our society work with these technologies in these ways of life? In the end of the day, even though I study technology, I'm really interested in what it means to be human, what it essentially comes down to, because even though times change, history moves, we live in different ecologies, architectural landscapes for our lives. In the end, we are still human creatures, and we're still having to respond to these things. So there isn't exactly a sociology of humans. I guess that would be kind of like anthropology, but I'm a sociology of culture and technology. But in the end of the day, like I said, I'm asking questions of, what are the things that don't change? What are the things we really need to be mindful of when we are either adopting technologies ourselves in our own lives or using technologies in our institutions, organizing how we do life together, even to the producers' questions, the folks that are designing and producing the technology, what should they be thinking about as they are innovating and considering the applications?
So as you've gotten into this research, where do you see this eternal experience of humans feeling lonely, having experiences of solitude? That's something that's not necessarily new to the technological age, but where do you see that starting to emerge in your area of study?
I think the question of loneliness and solitude, my interest in it began when I came upon this idea that we live in a time when we are expected to always be connected. And we have our devices that maybe some of us have them on our wrists. Some of us just have it in our pockets. But the expectation is we will always be accessible to people and that we should always be up on what's going on in people's lives, right? I started wondering just what that does to us when we are permanently connected, right? This kind of state of consciousness, in some ways, feeling like we never leave people. And, there was some kind of cell phone company years ago that had a campaign that was like a person on a cell phone and like there was always a crowd of people with them. The pitch was that was a good thing, right? That like wherever they went, there was always a crowd of people with them. But that commercial always struck me as a bit odd because I was thinking, well, sometimes we don't want a crowd of people with us. And sometimes that's actually not fantastic. And so what do we do now when we have technologies that always bring the crowd, like the crowd is always with us all the time? the question of technology and solitude and loneliness also comes up for me in the context of thinking about spiritual disciplines and the disciplines of solitude and silence, through the ancient desert fathers and mothers, and wondering how much more difficult it might be to actually practice these ancient disciplines as people who are very unaccustomed to being alone or silent, right? I'm sure, the disciplines of solitude and silence have always been challenging for people through the ages for various reasons, but wondering if in these days, in our times, as we are being formed by these technologies, how much more difficult is it? ? And then what does that mean about certain aspects of God's nature that become actually more difficult also for us to access or to experience because it might feel incredibly uncomfortable for us. We are unaccustomed to God's silence or God's stillness, right? Because we are a people on the move, always getting content, always getting some kind of feedback from someone immediately, right? And so what happens then with our interior spirituality, like the shape of our souls? What is it being formed, or what is still like a baby that needs to grow, right? That we need to kind of stretch and feed and be intentional about.
That commercial that you're talking about, I think, is a really fascinating example, because it seems like perhaps technology for us did really arise out of this desire to be more connected to each other. And I think a lot of what we see technology doing currently is continuing to try to perpetuate different ways of connecting with each other. Do you understand us as like digging ourselves into a deeper hole as we lean further into that? How do you see technology connecting or disconnecting people right now?
Well, the history of media and communication technologies has always celebrated, right, the capacity to transcend space and time, right? That's always been the promise. Whether it was even transportation technology, right, was always this fascinating capacity to overcome the limitations of our embodiment, right, of being in one place and people being far away. And then the communication technologies have always celebrated our capacity to talk to someone on the other side of the world, right? And those are wonderful things, right? I mean, it's incredible. It's a beautiful thing for families to be able to talk to each other when they're living in opposite sides of the world, right? I mean, what an incredible thing for a diaspora of people to stay connected. And at the same time, with these incredible benefits are these norms that develop, I think, right? So it's not just that there's a technology that comes into the world, it's that a society develops norms around how we should live. And we come to celebrating connections so much that when we are actually perhaps alone or quiet, people might think that something is wrong, right? Because now you have a technology that allows you to communicate all the time. Why wouldn't you use it? Kind of, Jacques Ellul writes about this. He talks about technique, this mindset that whatever you can do, you should do, right? And that technology and cultures that are technological perpetuate this, right? If you can do it, you should do it. And then so if you're not doing it, something must be wrong, right? Something must be wrong with you. I think it's always a tricky thing when we adapt technologies into our societies. There's wonderful benefits, but then the norms change. And certainly, like the commercial, there's a lot of forces that are encouraging you to connect and use their devices and spend the money to buy their devices to get that connection. But at the same time, we can be losing sight of aspects of our humanity that become harder for us to access now. It's harder for us to access being in touch with the rhythms of the natural world because so many of us live in these buildings that are awesome, that have electricity, that keep the lights on, right? And there's wonderful benefits to this. I don't want to give this stuff up, but that means I have to be super intentional about going outside, spending time in the sun or in the rain or whatever, right? And so it is this, I think the technology question has always had this tension of here are the benefits, right? But then how do you live in a way where those benefits don't become the defining way to live, defining what humanity is then because of the artifacts we've created.
This is fascinating. Because I'm hearing you say there's an aspect of like when we choose solitude, people then look at that as you're doing something wrong, or maybe we put that on ourselves. We're doing something wrong. We have access to this connection. And yet I think what I've been hearing in the contemporary culture is a lot of like, we have this problem of loneliness. We have the male loneliness epidemic. We have our young people are lonelier than ever. I'm just piecing together this, we have the problem of loneliness, but then we also have this aspect of like, oh, but we're not, could solitude in some way, choosing solitude, just these moments of disconnection from the massive crowd in some way, I don't want to say fix, but be a counterpart to our problem of loneliness. And I'm also really curious to know what you think about how this is shaping, you're talking about these questions of humanity. How's this shaping our younger generation? I think about this a lot. As part of my generation, I received my first cell phone when I was 12. I was in 7th grade. And I realize as I've grown older, the many ways that has shaped my generation distinctly from people even just a few years older than us. I'm really curious about those that are even younger than myself. And you've done some research into this. How is this shaping youth generally, but like their sense of humanity as a whole too?
I think it's helpful to distinguish between loneliness, social isolation, and solitude.
Yeah, thank you for offering those definitions.
Because we use these words very often interchangeably. And from the outside, someone looking in on someone, it could look the same. And we might use the word to apply to all three, but I think they're actually really different. Let's start with social isolation, because I think that's the easiest, actually, right? So social isolation is when someone is physically not with people and relationally impoverished, shall we say, in ties with people in their lives. So survey questions that ask, in the last 6 months, how many people have you talked to about something important, right? That's measuring social isolation. Because if you say 0, right, I've talked to no one about something important, that means I don't have people in my life, right, that I can share what's going on, like truly with. The social isolation piece is something that the data is showing we are becoming more social isolated as a people, right? And there are lots of factors that are contributing to that. The decline in bricks and mortar neighborhoods, geographic mobility, people moving here and there for school and jobs, right? We don't have as much rootedness. Going back to the 60s, more and more people going to college, women going to college and working, right? And not going back home to live once you're out of the home when you're 18, whatever, right? That those trends are leading to more people living independently, but also alone, socially, with the potential for social isolation. That's where the technology piece comes to. Because as more and more of us have laptops and phones and ways to quote unquote connect with people, we are increasingly in our homes doing that and not actually with people. Or we are consuming content and not actually communicating with people. That social isolation is also increasing because we might be online in chat rooms and so forth, but we might not actually be living with folks, talking or cultivating certain kinds of relationships that we feel are intimate in certain regards. Okay. Loneliness then. Loneliness is the gap between what you think you should have in terms of satisfaction in relationships and what you perceive to be the case for you. So that's the gap.
Okay.
So social isolation is kind of an objective measure, so to speak. How many people can you talk to about important things? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Loneliness is subjective. I have this gap between what I think I have and what I want. So loneliness is interesting because, sure, if you're in the house alone and you're also not talking to people, on the phone or whatever, you can feel lonely. But you could be married and you could have a thriving social life and still be lonely. So from the outside, you might not look lonely, but you might inside be very lonely, right? Because there's this subjective interior gap. So I think loneliness is super interesting because in some ways it's more a measure of your interiority than the objective, right? Of course, there can be a relationship, of course. But what's interesting also when it comes to technology and young people is if loneliness is in fact a gap between what I have and what I want. When I'm on social media and I'm looking at all these people having a great time and thinking I'm supposed to have that same thing, my expectation is going up, right? Because I'm thinking everybody has this incredible life but me. And so even though I might actually have a pretty vibrant social life with cool friends, but this is making me feel bad about my life. So the gap increases, even though objectively nothing has changed, right? So that's what I find fascinating about the loneliness piece with technology is how it's affecting our expectations rather than what might be actually happening, in your life. And then solitude is what some psychologists call a positive aloneness, right? So this is an aloneness that is generative, right? Where we have a conversation where, as David White puts it, we're capable of having a conversation with ourselves. And as the Desert Fathers and Mothers would put it, we are able to have a conversation with God. That solitude is the space in which we have these conversations that could otherwise be ignored, forgotten, pushed away because we don't want to have those conversations, but that are actually both crucial for our human development, just as a human being to be self-reflective, being able to create a narrative about what's been happening in my life, but also spiritually, right? To dig into, what is my soul saying, what hunger is there? Has God been speaking to me? And I haven't been paying attention, right? What is the divine presence even like what does divine love even feel like to be present to? The solitude is the space in which we can experience that.
So then is there a perceived or understood correlation between somebody's capacity for solitude and their experiences of loneliness?
Interesting question. Yeah, I'm not aware of whether that correlation has been addressed, but that would be super interesting.
Yeah. I also want to turn back towards the youth a little bit, and especially as you're bringing these themes of solitude as a space for spirituality. Bring me further into that area of focus. How are youth responding to, we know that their experiences of loneliness are increasing. Is there a sense of identifying some of the social media that you're naming as a problem or as a factor in it? Or where do things seem to be trending in our current moment?
So when it comes to young people's relationship to solitude, most of the research that I've seen tends to focus on social isolation. And the loneliness is always, because of its subjective nature, is much more difficult to grasp. In terms of the writings that I've seen, I think there's two pieces. One is an argument that says it's not a bad thing when you're a young person to experience loneliness every once in a while. Right. There's more and more people writing in this vein that loneliness, episodic loneliness, not chronic loneliness, right? Because there's the debilitating type of loneliness that should have interventions, right? But episodic loneliness right? Is something that young people, human beings should experience, because that is the portal to asking some big questions, right? That's the beginning point, right? To saying, what is this all about? What is my behavior reflecting about me? What is this relationship actually? Pain that comes with loneliness can be the beginning of big questions that otherwise would be left unexplored if we were merely kind of frolicking all the time, right? Kind of happily, blissfully ignorant, shall we say.
Sure.
And so there's that vein of argument. And then I think there's another vein of argument that just says, you don't have to experience loneliness to get to solitude, right? That solitude is something that one should practice. Walking through the woods without your phones, like that's a good thing. Or just, spending some time doodling or watercoloring in your room without any other sort of communication or content, music, anything, just quiet, right? And just reflecting on things is a good thing. Again, because it is the way to hear oneself, and also to, if you're a person of faith, to kind of extend your antenna out to the divine. Say, hey, is there something going on that I just haven't been paying attention to? I don't know that there's been much empirical studies in this area. There's certainly been writings more on the solitude side coming from the boredom literature, right? That says boredom is not a bad thing. Boredom is actually often the launching off point for creativity. And so they might not use the word solitude at those times, but that it's very similar, right? That when you're bored, everyone always says, when I was a kid, I had times when I was just bored. And that feel often is bored alone, not bored with other people. Where you're just sitting in your room, throwing the ball against the wall and just repetitively doing that, for an hour because there's nothing else to do.
Before we share the rest of today's episode, here's what's coming up next time in our limited series, Solo.
An anchorage is a small cell, not always, but usually adjoined to a church on the side. And the idea was that it was one of the most venerated forms of Christian devotion at the time. The idea being that to become an anchorite or anchoress, you professed yourself dead to the world. You were kind of moving on to the next life, the sort of afterlife, and turning your back on daily preoccupations, temptations, putting a line between yourself and the outside world, and really turning your eyes to God and to heaven. It was a time to think, to contemplate, but it was also quite demanding in terms of things like fasting, prayer cycles. It wasn't supposed to be easy. That was kind of the point. But at the heart of the experience was solitude, the idea of being on your own so that you can really focus wholeheartedly on God.
Glad you're with us. Now back to the episode. The AI research that you're doing currently, we're kind of also getting to this idea of faux connection almost that technology can facilitate. I think that, as you've named, one of the blessings of technology is being able to stay connected to our friends and family in far places. And I can think of numerous times where I've had essential, meaningful, profound conversations with friends and family from a distance. And there is a sense, I think, of something lacking there when you're not in person and maybe able to end the conversation with a hug. And I'm really curious where AI comes into the picture for you. And this is a new thing, I think, for all of us. Everybody's kind of trying to grapple with what does this mean of our understanding of humanity and our understanding of our responsibility to each other and connection. So where does AI come into the picture?
Let me just put a little asterisk before we get to AI on maybe what I'm implying. I think I'm always slightly uncomfortable with maybe saying that it's like a pseudo relationship or a faux relationship when we're online, because I really do think those connections are genuine, as you said. I think for me, it's more that there is something about the face-to-face embodied experience that we have, whether it's with close ties or even weak ties, like even the barista that I see every week at the same time, right? There's something meaningful that is happening there that can impact how lonely or not lonely I feel that day, right? Even if they're not, someone that actually knows anything about me, right? There's something about that human encounter that is face-to-face and embodied that feeds our souls in a way that is just distinct, but also necessary than what we encounter through, the video chat or a phone call, that can also be deeply satisfying.
Yes.
So that's just my little asterisk there. So when it comes to AI, the piece of it I'm interested in is the role of AI chatbots and AI companionship, right? That's all in the news these days because all the different companies are selling products telling us that we just need their AI friends to help us not feel lonely. And the part of it that I'm actually interested in is the place in which chatbots get used in context of care. So if you are looking for a therapist, but you don't have enough money, your insurance doesn't cover, right, this human therapist, but you can have this chatbot therapist, right, to talk to. Or you live in a town that is under-resourced with teachers, and so you're given this chatbot tutor. What does that look like when we are relying on chatbots to provide care for people in those contexts? And I know that there are lots of people in the game about the differences between what's machine and what's human, right? And I'm kind of letting the philosophers and the theologians have that conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of interested in this growing reliance and marketing of chatbots in these contexts of care, because there is this underlying argument. And here I have to give credit to Alison Pugh, a sociologist at Virginia, who wrote a fantastic book called The Last Human Job. Because here's where she lays out this very compelling argument that we hear all the time, which is, of course, I wouldn't want to recommend someone to have a chatbot therapist, but it's better than nothing for someone who's really lonely. Like, isn't it better than nothing? It's the better than nothing argument on technology that is super compelling. Yeah, like I would rather have someone interact with something than no one. But Alison Pugh makes the counter argument, right? She says, this argument is it sounds altruistic, but actually leads to deeper and deeper levels of inequality, right? It sounds like, for those communities that don't have these resources, shouldn't they have at least these chatbots?
Okay.
Right? It's better than nothing. We can't get them real teachers. We can't get them real human therapists. So let's give them these chatbots. She says, no. This is actually just seeding our political situation. That's saying, I will not pour money into getting you better teachers, getting you better therapists. I will not pour money and resources into creating a system that actually will provide you with good teachers and therapists and service providers. So her argument is, it sounds altruistic. It's actually a political argument about what we think we want to put our resources into, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, let's put our money into making better chatbots that are more human rather than actually just training and resourcing for there to be more humans who are teachers and therapists and so forth. So it's a question of equality and justice for her, which I find very compelling.
Absolutely.
There's this recent study that came out, again, from Virginia, the Institute of Family Studies, had this fascinating thing where they were studying millennials and Gen Zers, and they were asking them about AI. And what they found was that there were class differences.
Okay.
The lower class you are, the less educated you are, the more skeptical you are of AI in general. Okay. So that's point number one. Mm-hmm. But then when asked about whether they would be open to having an AI romance, it flips. So the less resources you have, the less education you have, the more open you are to engaging in AI romance.
Wow.
Super interesting, right? Like skeptical, but open.
What does this mean? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like you would expect it to be aligned in the opposite ways, right? And so my first guess, I don't know, this is just, like a hot take, is that for young people who are likely in communities and life circumstances where the horizons don't look great, your job prospects are not great. You probably are in a small town with not a lot of people. You just don't have a lot to look forward to necessarily. You are skeptical about AI, but you're like, well, I don't know. Maybe that's better than nothing for me, right? Like in that space, like, I don't know if I'm going to find a partner that's actually going to listen to me, be patient with me. I don't know. Maybe that's all I've got. So there's like, possibly, I don't know, maybe there's a resignation, a kind of like, I don't like this, but this might be all I get. Because I don't see anyone in society reaching out to me, seeing me, right? Wanting to hear my story. I don't know. Again, that's just a thought. But it makes me think about from a faith community perspective.
Yes.
Okay, church, let's step it up.
Yeah.
Right? Churches, the biggest asset and strength that we have is that we are embodied and we are in places, real places. And even if we're small, even if we're just few, not a lot of resources, we can be near to people in their place. We might not be able to fix their problems, but we can walk with them. We can live in solidarity with them. And Alison Pugh makes this point about how, chatbots can be very knowledgeable. They can appear so judgment-free and affirming, and many people are talking about how that can go sideways, right? Kind of like a little too affirmative, right? About things that should actually, be corralled in and be like, no, that's not actually healthy. So much of the AI argument assumes that people just want to be seen, which again sounds really compelling. They're like, yeah, people just want to be seen, listened to, heard. And she's like, no. What human beings actually want is they want to be seen by another human being. Why? Because that human being creates risk for them. That human being could judge them, could dismiss them, could say, forget you, like you're hopeless. It's that risk. But when that human being listens and takes in and doesn't say that and actually says, I cherish your dignity. I cherish your life experience. You are worthy of my time, right? Even despite whatever has just been said,
right?
That's the piece of it that we want as human beings, not merely that someone's just going to receive. Which again, I'm just like, oh, that's gold, right? Good job, Alison Pugh, right? That's incredible insight into our humanness. But for those who are Christians, I think that's also insight into what grace is.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's grace.
Amen.
It's like, that's what it is, right? And so, and that's what everybody is longing for in the end. And in that sense, AI technologies aren't capable of creating conditions in which grace can happen. It's endemic to personhood. So that's where my thoughts go on AI and loneliness. And so the idea generally is that I'm not so much talking about how does loneliness then lead people to rely on AI technologies, which certainly can happen, and is happening. We see that in the numbers of people seeking out AI companionships, etc. What I'm interested in is what happens in a society that disproportionately relegates chatbots to people to say, here's what we're going to give you. And that those populations who are already vulnerable in various ways are precisely the people that will experience more loneliness because they won't have human connection, right? Even in these professionalized care settings.
Oh my gosh, so much where we're at as a society, I think, thinking about the grace that we extend to each other and also just our responsibility to each other. One of the things I also wanted to ask you about was you're talking about AI as sort of coming in counter to or adjacent to another human being in conversation. And I've wondered if there's a sense of AI almost as a divine figure. Is some people engaging with it that way? Do you have a sense of what, as we're thinking about solitude as a space for better listening to God and opening ourselves to divine relation, are people turning to AI as a solution for that as well? And I think you always have to ask with these new technologies, is there a sense of, I think with almost anything, God can work through anything. Where do we draw the line with AI?
Anecdotally and just in some of my own readings, I've definitely seen that some people or read about people that perceive the all-knowing quality of AI to be godlike. And that makes sense to me. There's all kinds of people in all different kinds of life circumstances that I think, all the way back in the early 90s, Sherry Turkle, the social psychologist at MIT, she was writing about human-computer interface early. And she was always saying that, human beings are so generous. We give machines human-like we project onto machines human-like properties very easily. This was back in the 90s when AI was very, very clunky, kind of like back in the Tamagotchi pet days. Yes. But it's like, as that says something about us, as human beings, are just willing to be in relationship. We're so relational that we will even take a pretty clunky computer program and attribute kind of these human-like qualities. And so now, not surprisingly, with something much more sophisticated, we would attribute even divine, godlike properties, right? Because it seems so powerful. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then what are the limits? And how God can use technology.
Yeah.
Honestly, I haven't thought a whole lot about that area yet. And I guess when it comes to the broader question of God using technologies, but at the same time, as a sociologist, I think what we have, what our discipline can contribute to conversations is the reminder that as human beings, we function within environments. Mm-hmm. We function within certain kinds of social conditions that set us up to fail or to succeed. So whereas psychology kind of locates, right, everything in your brain, or right, in your personhood and in your own story, right, like what's happened to you as a child and so forth. Sociology reminds us that there are all these external factors that are shaping what is happening to us. Things that are outside of my control, right? Because they're societal, they're institutional, they're organizational. And so I would say for AI, sure, good things can come out of even the most wonky of AI applications. I'm not going to say that that's never going to happen, but I think it's our responsibility to create social conditions, environments that actually set people up to succeed in the things that are essential in their lives. Let's not make it so hard for people to experience solitude. Let's not make it so hard for people to experience the divine, right? In the ways that we understand it to be. And again, it's not to say that there might not be new things that we can learn, right? I know lots of people that talk about engaging in practices of centering prayer, for example, through online groups, online prayer circles, right? And really feeling the divine working through that space, even though they're not in the room together. I believe that can happen. Why not? I'm not averse to that. But hey, if I could be in a room with people, if we can provide that for people, why wouldn't we? because there are all these other benefits, right, that come with that are much more difficult or just not accessible. So a lot of what I end up thinking about and proposing is always concerned. And I feel like I'm trying to address problems with old answers or old fashioned disses. It's sort of like, well, as human beings, there are certain things that haven't changed. Discipleship now is the same thing as discipleship 100 years ago. These are still the same questions of idolatries, the same questions of compulsions, the same questions of our vulnerabilities. These are all the same questions. We have new variables. Maybe they're actually more difficult to overcome, right? Because they have been normalized or institutionalized in certain ways. So those are different. But in the end of the day, the movement, the kind of work that has to be done, the kind of decisions that have to get made are the same.
And the same need for the church to step in, step up. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, to anyone who might be listening, sitting with their own feelings of loneliness or perhaps just contemplating solitude, what do you think are the questions we should be asking of those feelings?
So first I would say we should cut ourselves a lot of slack. We need to remind ourselves that feeling lonely is very human. And it doesn't mean that something's wrong with me. It's not that I'm deficient, because I think we need to push against the lie. That's just you've done something wrong. Just, something's wrong with you. That's the lie of condemnation, right? That says, this is all your fault. And then from there, move into curiosity. Again, it's what I'm trying to encourage is to not be afraid. I think we're afraid, right? We're afraid of, it can be scary, right? To be oh my gosh, is this really happening to me? Or why am I feeling this way? Or what's going to happen if I let myself be alone? I don't know what thoughts I'm going to have. I know emotions are going to come up for me. We want to be curious about the time and not try to control it. And so our curiosity can lead us to ask the questions, what do I need to see today, now, in this moment, right? Understanding that our emotions are often all over the place and circumstances can change and we can turn on a dime. What do I need to see now? And for people of faith, asking, Lord, what is it that you want me to see now? And if we're uncomfortable, still feeling tense, asking for peace, asking for calmness, saying, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what's going to come up. Help me to see, help me to be able to hold whatever it is. And if I'm not able to hold it, then please provide someone to help me hold this, right? If someone needs to help me hold this difficult thing. And so I think those questions of acceptance, those questions of curiosity is what can start to, I always think the image I always have is where we get really ossified, stiff with who we think we are and what we're about and what life is. But solitude and loneliness starts to kind of soften it up. It can feel like it's unsettling and our foundation is shaking, but actually it's softening it up in a very important way, to grow, right? And to hear something new. And so, I think it's different for everyone. Personalities, life experiences, it's going to be different. But I feel like those basic movements, your interior movements, are really important for those times and those experiences to be generative and not be kind of the spiral, type. It can be very easily if we kind of get down on ourselves and kind of move them. So I'm someone who needs paper and scribblings. I feel like it is getting things out of me, and other people that might be moving their body, right? Or doing some kind of repetitive action. I have friends who knit, and that's it's what they, that's what gets them into a generative zone. I encourage people to be self-aware and self-reflective about what works for you when you either encounter the loneliness or are seeking solitude, to kind of create the condition that helps you, right, hear, listen, articulate, reflect, and the things that God is calling you to.
Amen. Felicia, thank you so much for bringing not only your expertise in your field, but also your deep faith to our podcast today. I feel enlightened and hopeful leaving this conversation. So thank you for offering this to our listeners today.
For sure. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured Felicia Wu Song, interview by Macie Bridge, production assistance by Alexa Rollo, Emily Brookfield, and Hope Shun. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edit and produce the show. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu and lifeworthliving.yale.edu, where you can find past episodes, articles, videos, books, and other educational resources that help people envision and pursue lives worthy of our humanity. If you're new to the show, remember to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you've been listening for a while, consider this request. Share one of your favorite episodes, maybe it's this one, in your next conversation, whether it's with family, friends, coworkers, or online. As always, thanks for listening, friends. We'll be back with more soon.